Hi, this is Andrew Smith, instructor at Ferris State University and runner of artbysmitty.com. This is going to be part 7 of the Next Gen Helmet tutorial series. And if you remember from last time, we basically started developing our Photoshop document with our guides, our ambient occlusion, and just our basic diffuse colors to get something that in 3D Studio Max looks like this. In this tutorial, we're simply going to paint all of the helmet decals. So we're going to strictly stay with the diffuse texture map in this tutorial series. I'm going to show you my basic workflow, and then I will probably speed up the video as I've completely finished texturing the rest of the diffuse decals on this helmet. In the next part, we'll go over covering how to create a specular map for this helmet. And I'm lucky enough to where I have this exact helmet right in front of me on my computer desk, so I know exactly what the specular values look like and what types of materials are used on this helmet. So it always definitely helps. The better reference you have, the better your 3D model can be. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is, if I hit F4, you can see my wireframe of my low poly mesh. I'm going to make sure this is selected, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit File, Export, Selected. And I'm just going to export this to my desktop as canvas.obj. I'm basically going to use this mesh as a canvas to paint my decals on inside of ZBrush. I want to preserve texture coordinates. We do not care about materials at this point, and make sure my preset is ZBrush. I'm going to hit export, and then I can come in here and hit done. Next, I'm going to come into ZBrush, hit comma to get rid of the spotlight, hit import, go to my desktop, find my canvas, hit open, click and drag in my scene, hit T to enter edit mode. And what I'm going to do next is, notice I'm in orthographic view. I always work in perspective unless I'm modeling from a model sheet and I have to have specific things done. But for the most part, I always sculpt, texture, model in perspective. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and activate my flat color, so that way I'm looking at nothing but the diffuse. And next, I will go over here to texture map, and I'm going to, actually, I'll go up here to texture and say import. I'm going to go to my next gen helmet. I'm going to import the diffuse and hit open. Next, I'll go back up to texture, and it might help if I actually dock this menu over here. And in this case, what I'll do is actually just probably end up docking, well, not my tool. Let's put that back over there, and let's go ahead and dock the texture menu as well. And I'm going to drag this texture menu, and excuse me while I readjust my window size. I'm going to grab this texture and throw it over here to this side. And maybe we'll just have to do it like this. There we go. Okay. So I have this texture menu, and I'm going to simply come over here, and I'm going to hit flip in the V for flip vertical, just because ZBrush, that's how ZBrush works. It flips your UV channels for whatever reason. Next, I'll go over to my tool menu and say texture map. Right now has none. I'll go ahead and find this helmet and apply that texture to my helmet. And again, if you didn't flip it vertically, it's going to look really weird because the UVs won't line up with their respective islands. At this point, what I'm going to do is, again, hit Shift F and we can see our wireframe. And at this point, it should look pretty much the same as it does in my 3D Studio Max scene, except we're going to be using poly paint in ZBrush. You know, you guys could use 3D Coat if you're familiar with that. I use ZBrush for my pipeline. And in order to actually paint details on this, I have to have, I paint on vertices. That's what poly paint does. It paints on vertices. And right now, if I painted on this, I wouldn't be able to get very much detail at all. So what I'm going to do is come up here to geometry, uncheck the smooth button and then just hit divide a few times until I can just hit Control D for this, until I'm roughly around, 1-2 million polygons, and this looks good. I'm going to hit Shift F to get out of wireframe mode, and at this point I'll come up here and turn off Z-Add, and I'll turn on RGB, so that way I can come in here, and if I chose red, well, before I choose red, what we'll do is we'll come over here and say polypaint, and polypaint from texture. So now this texture map has been applied as polypaint, and we can see that the detail actually isn't as good as I want. So I'm going to undo that. Control Z, and I'm actually going to come up here to geometry, and I'm going to divide this one more time. And so now I'm working with 7 million. And now since that's up to 7 million, if I hit polypaint from texture, notice that my details are much crisper and coming through a little bit better. So that'll work. At this point, I'm going to hold Shift D and go back down to my lowest subdivision level. And you can see the polypaint data has been projected onto this model. At this point, I can close this texture menu on the left side. And I'm just going to come up here and hit Save Tool As, and we'll go to Desktop, and I'll save it as my canvas. I'm basically going to use this Z tool every time I need to come in and paint a new decal or logo on this helmet or anything, scratches, whatever. It's just going to be basically my canvas. Okay, so come back all the way up to my highest subdivision level to get back up to 7 million points. We can go ahead and obviously we want colorize on. At this point I want to come here to texture map, and if I were to start painting on this, it's going to start painting with that texture map since it's what I have applied. So undo that and make sure that my texture is off, and now I'll paint with whatever color is over here. So I should be getting red, and actually I have to go up to my texture menu and turn texture off there. So now I should come in here and be able to start painting in red. So easy enough. At this point, what we could do is come in here and hit transform, activate symmetry, and now if I paint on one side, it paints on the other. Which this helmet, for the most part, is going to be fairly symmetrical in terms of what the decal designs look like, etc. So at this point, I'm going to hit P and go into ortho view because I want to sculpt or paint directly onto the left side of this helmet. And if you remember, I'm going to pull up my repository real quick. If we look here in textures, and here's some of the textures we baked out to get our PSD texture maps in here. I also have this folder called Stencils, and here's where my reference is in terms of what I thought would be cool to paint on designs. We found this this wing logo. We found some machine guns because again I'm doing something for Machine Gun Preacher dude that I thought was pretty cool. And I just found some other obviously really cool wing designs, and I really like this one up here. It kind of has the white background like we wanted, and I love all this oriental design going on. It's just really, really beautiful to look at, and I apologize if mine doesn't come out quite this good. I'm a pretty terrible graphic designer, but that's why I get lots of reference, and hopefully it turns out pretty decent. So with that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just have these up on my other monitor, and I'm going to come in here and just kind of start playing around with different designs and see what we can come up with. So I'm going to move that over. We can probably minimize this. And at this point, I'm going to hit Control and make sure my mask is set from freehand to we're actually going to come in here and say, well, right now my mask is set to that, but I'm going to make sure that is going to be lasso. So now I can come in here and actually just start masking off areas that I would like to design for, like these wings and other parts. So again, I'm just adjusting my reference on the other monitor here so I can have a decent idea of what I'd like to accomplish with this. So right now I'm going to be working with from about here to roughly that area, my mesh. I'm just going to invert that selection, and I'll come in here and just kind of adjust that to make it a little bit smoother. And I'm just going to kind of take a look and see how this is working for my eyes. And just make masking selections really just accordingly to what I want to do. Alright, cool. At this point I can come in and just start masking areas off that I don't want to be painted on. And again, I'm going to look at some of this reference for things like wings and whatnot. I'm also going to come in here and delete as much of this as I can so I don't have to clean that up so much once I export this texture out. Okay, so now I'm just going to come in here and start painting some winged ideas. I actually didn't like those masks down there. I do like these ones, however. At this point, I might just kind of start focusing up here on the top. And at this point, I just cleared that mask, and I'm going to start kind of a new design. Alright, so this wing design's starting to look pretty cool. But again, I'm not going to bore you guys with trying to watch me do my really poor graphic design on this helmet. Like I said, I'll speed that part out once I start doing the rest of this. But for the most part, I'd say that this is starting to look pretty cool. So I'm just going to invert that selection and come in here and make sure that areas that don't need this don't receive it for the most part. We'll have to obviously clean that up inside of Photoshop a little bit. Okay, so at this point, what I'll do is I'll probably grab some crazy color like pink and make that brush really big, and just come in here and start painting that in. And I'm doing it pink not because I want it to be pink on my helmet, but because I want to be able to select that very easily inside of Photoshop once I export this out. So what I'm going to do now is all I have to do is control click to get rid of that, and now I have my nice nice wing mask going. And at this point I'm going to come over here to texture map and say Actually first I need to go to my UV map and make sure that my texture size is the same as it is here in Photoshop. So it's been a while since I worked on this helmet. I'm just going to go here and see I'm using a 2048, and I'll go into ZBrush, and it's already set to 2048. UV map border is 4, that's fine. That just controls your padding. And at this point, after I check my UV map, I'm just going to go here and say new from Polypaint, and notice it's going to create that new texture with the wings on it. So I'm going to hit clone texture. I'll go up here to my texture menu. I will say flip in the V, and then I will say export. And to desktop, we're just going to call this one Wings 1 PSD, hit save. And now that's me done with ZBrush. I'll come back into Photoshop, and I'm going to open up this wing texture, and all I have to do is Control A, Control C, close it, and then come in here under my diffuse layer, and I'm going to create a new folder under my diffuse folder and call this one Decals, so I can control all of my decals. These are going to be kind of like tattoos on the helmet. So I'll create a new layer inside of there, and we'll call this one Wings 1, and paste it. And I'm going to turn off AO for the time being, and hit W, and I'm going to tell this to have a little bit of a tolerance, so 5, and uncheck contiguous if you have contiguous on. And again, select my pink here, and I'm just going to hit copy, paste, and delete this old one. So now what I have here is just decals for the pink for the helmet, and now I can just kind of manually come in here and hit M for my marquee tool, and just select all of these areas in pink that weren't supposed to be transferred in the texture, and hit delete. And at this point I'm going to right click on this guy, say blending options, and say color overlay, and we're going to change this to just a black. I might even use, I'm very rarely ever use a solid black, so I might come in here and say that this is going to be a little bit lighter than black, and I'll have a little bit of hue to it as well. Hit OK. And at this point I'll just create another layer, select both, collapse them, and just call this Wings 1 again. And at this point I can turn my ambient occlusion back on, and as we zoom in here, we can see that these Wings 1 obviously intrude on some areas that it really shouldn't be intruding on. So I can turn this on and off just to kind of see where I'm selecting, but for the most part I need to come in here and just delete it from those areas. So I'll just hit my lasso tool and come in here and double check where this needs to be, and I'm going to come in and just start getting rid of that black texture from areas where it does not necessarily need to be. Hit delete, and notice I might have missed a few spots, so I'm just going to hit B for brush, come in here, select this color, and just kind of paint it in. Just making sure that this paint covers everything. And again, this is why doing things like speed paints and stuff all the time are good, so that you're comfortable working inside your texture maps and coming in and painting out problem areas that you may have. So that looks pretty good for a first pass, and what I'll do is just hit Control S to save this. And again, we can always turn these certain decal layers on or off, so if you want to just experiment and try it out and see what happens, you can always turn these things on and off. And we'll go back into Max, and you know, if we choose to look at this, we can see turn edges off, and we can now see that my wings are on my helmet. And again, just hitting Shift Q is going to allow me to kind of view this decal and see what exactly we have going on here. So one thing you might be asking is, why didn't we just paint this decal in Photoshop? The answer to that is, if you notice here, some of these wings kind of come on from one island and go on to the next, and it'd be really hard to line that up if we didn't use something like polypaint or painting directly on the model. So it's just a foolproof way for me to not have seams in my texture maps, which is why I do this process. And obviously down here we need to come in and delete some of this as well. And at this point, what I could probably do, I'm going to turn off my ambient occlusion, and I'll turn that on and then off. And notice I can actually select my diffuse layers and say, okay, I need to obviously delete these parts from the wings. And it looks like it's selected up here a little bit too, but that's fine. And now I have a little bit better idea of where I need to come in here and delete more of these wings. Hit delete, and I missed the little guy down here. Hit delete. Alright. Next, I notice I need to delete it from some of this stuff in here. Hit delete. And now save that, come back into Max, and just kind of see what exactly we got rid of in the paint. So it's starting to look pretty cool. Like I said, the rest of this tutorial I'm going to go in and just kind of speed this process up. I'm going to come in and polypaint the colors of some of these bolts, screws, springs, finish the logos for all this, add a little bit more detail than just this solid black for the wings, and we should have a pretty cool looking diffuse texture map by the time I'm done. So I'm going to put on some music, I'm going to speed this video up for you, and in the next part we're going to talk about creating spec maps for this helmet. Thanks for watching. Alright guys, so here's the final diffuse texture that I created for this helmet. If we zoom around, we can see I added all kinds of things like helmet text, finished up with the graphics. I could try to make it asymmetrical so that the text is on this side and designs are on this side. Again, like I'm doing this for the Machine Gun Preacher and the Angels of East Africa. So if you saw the movie, you know that the dude is basically a preacher guy, and so he's also kind of like this know-it-all guy with guns and helps protect people. So I put the machine guns on the back just to kind of fit the theme of this and make it feel like it has a purpose. Like I said, I added text, went in here, painted out any seams. I added some cloth texture here to this cloth part on the inside. A few seams here, but it's not the end of the world. I'll probably end up fixing those a little bit before I start the spec map. Also, you can see here the text is backwards in here, so I'm going to go ahead and flip that before I start the spec map. And also, there was a few artifacts in my seams here and here that I have to go in and actually fix before I start adding spec maps to this. So I'm going to do that outside of the video tutorial, and the next video tutorial is going to cover creating a spec map for this helmet. And after we do that, we're going to be testing it in Marmoset to see what happens. You can take a look here at the Photoshop file that I'm using. Here's what the final diffuse texture looked like. So it turned out pretty cool. First time doing something like this, so kind of proud of it. Turn off ambient occlusion so you can just see the straight up diffuse, and then also with the AO on. If we look at my diffuse levels, here I have things for the metal, black plastic, the cloth overlay, and obviously just the basic cloth material. Also did some materials for the vents, and of course the helmet white. Inside here's all my decals that I did with things like the text, and then just all these different decals like the orange, and the black, and some wings that I just went in and painted with ZBrush, and obviously compositing them here inside of Photoshop together to create my final diffuse texture. And these layers are going to come in real handy when I start creating the spec maps. So that's why I kind of have them all split up into different layers. Otherwise I'd have to go in and hand paint the spec map, which would take forever to get it lined up perfectly with my diffuse. So that's the reason behind all these layers. I try and name them decently so I can at least understand what's going on. You're going to want to name yours a little bit more appropriately, just because I know I'm the only one working on it. But if you're in a studio environment, you're going to want to make sure that these things are labeled to whatever the studio uses for naming conventions. So that's it. Hopefully you guys kind of got to see the process a little bit in creating the diffuse map and can apply it to your own helmets. Thanks for watching.